was like, okay, this is a gift and I can better use it to help people feel a lot more seen, a lot more safe and held in their space, and even more creative, which ideally allows you to manifest your more authentic life because you are surrounded by something that reflects who you are.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on Constructive Conversations, the podcast that dives deep into the chasm that exists between contractors and their customers. Our goal is to improve communication between contractors and their customers by interviewing people on both sides and gleaning the keys of how to have your construction project go right. Joining us today is Karissa Shemonichek, owner of Palladian Home. She's an interior designer and decorator who's been in the industry for 11 years because of her unique ability to connect deeply with customers and turn their space into a reflection of their true selves. In this episode, we discuss the nuances of interior design, how to communicate with your partner so that your project goes smoothly, and many other topics such as sustainable design and even how to design a space for yourself if you're on a budget. Karissa's expertise is obvious, and if you've never worked with an interior designer before, this is an eye-opening podcast. Karissa, thanks for joining us today on Constructive Conversations. Can you introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for having me. I am Karissa, an interior designer and decorator, owner of Palladian Home, where we construct spaces around people's energetic signatures.
Awesome, that's great. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in the industry for 11 years, but I've really tapped into understanding people and their essence and kind of designing spaces around their energy probably only about 4 years ago. It was kind of a journey to have that realization. At first, I just thought that we all innately knew how to do that. And so I wasn't really saying that that's actually something I can do. And then the more I kind of dove into, I'll call it a gift. And really, it's just like a high sense of empathy, which we all have. But when I really dove into that, I was like, okay, there's something here. And if I start explaining to people that I can better connect with them to give them the outcome of something that truly reflects them versus kind of a copy and paste from Pinterest or House or Instagram, then I think people will be really interested in that. And sure enough, I pitched it to people that way and let them know, like, hey, we really create a space that is yours. And it's been rapid speed fire ever since.
Wow, that's great. That's very cool. Can you talk about that journey? What was that journey like to finding out that that's a gift you had and then developing that into your business?
So initially, as a young child, I could always pick up on people really easily. It was kind of just something that came naturally to me. And then over time, getting into the industry, working with people, starting to develop ideas with people, I would create a space and they would often say, wow, this is exactly what I wanted, but I didn't know how to explain it to you. And yet you delivered it. And so I would get that time and time and time again. So I was like, okay, there's something here. So then when I rebranded about 4 years ago, I was chatting with my business coach at the time and we kind of just workshopped it and I was like, okay, this is a gift and I can better use it to help people feel a lot more seen, a lot more safe and held in their space, and even more creative, which ideally allows you to manifest your more authentic life because you are surrounded by something that reflects who you are.
Wow, that's awesome. And so what I'm hearing is that's a gift you sort of already had. Did you have to do any work to develop it? Do you have any practices that sort of helped you along that journey?
I've been meditating off and on since I was 15. So I think that that's part of honing in on it because you almost have to get really quiet and know yourself, know your own energy and your essence before you can start deciphering really what other people's feelings are, what their energy is, and what it feels like. So I would say meditation has been a really big one. Before I go to each client's home, I will always sit in meditation, open myself up, kind of cleanse my chakras, allow my system to just feel really grounded. And then I go into a space of allowing any information to come through that needs to come through for that client. And then going into the meeting, I have an open vessel, an open channel, and I'm able to just really be with them and practice the opportunity of being very present, which again allows me to just sense them and what they need. And then we're able to create a space from there. So when I'm actually physically designing, though, and the client's not in front of me, I go into a bit of a meditative state and I create from there. So it's almost like I send out a little chord to the client, and then I get the feeling of what they're looking for, of how they want to feel in their space. And then that's how it kind of comes to be when I'm alone and creating. And then, like I said, when I'm with them, it's more of just like this energetic interaction. So it feels like a way more natural way of doing things. As before, I worked for other firms at the beginning of my career. I did some contract work, and it felt like I was always chasing a specific style.
Wow, that's really good stuff. So when you meet with a client, you're saying you open yourself up before you meet so that you're open and receptive to the interaction with them. And going back to what you said at the beginning, the end product is what they wanted that they didn't know how to communicate, and maybe even that they didn't know that they wanted, or in other words, they couldn't communicate that. So this is some next level communication you're doing because it's nonverbal. So that's very cool.
It's been a fun process.
I really like that. I also meditate a lot, so I appreciate that process.
Oh, that's so
That's very
cool.
cool.
So do you find that you have a very similar kind of way of interacting with your clients too, where you're like, okay, I can kind of catch their vibe and I'm able to create from here?
Yes, but it's not like an explicit process where I say, okay, I'm going to open myself up. I've gotten that feedback. Oh yeah, this is exactly what we wanted. But I like that you're intentional about it, and I might have to apply that because I'm sure that that would make a huge difference. Yeah, that's really cool. So, can you talk about a project? What's your typical project look like?
They range quite a bit. I would say it's typically a renovation. It's a renovation for people that are either close to retirement or just retired, and they are wanting their space to really feel like them. They want to come home and they want to be at ease, relax, like they've just worked their whole lives. They want to enjoy what they've worked for, you know? So their home is this beautiful container that they get to come into and appreciate and see how they're best reflected in. Okay, so these clients, like I said, they're typically people that are near retirement, early retirement, wanting to create a beautiful space for themselves. They are looking to either build or renovate, typically renovate. And then it goes from renovation all the way up to fully decorating. Now, this aspect of decor can be done two ways. So sometimes people want to pay hourly just to have me go shopping with them, as other people would like me to put together the whole decor package, and then they go away for a week or a weekend, and then they come back and they get to have their little HGTV moment because I've shopped everything, I've set it up, and they basically just get to come through the door and come home and enjoy it. So I kind of have clients that are a mix of that sometimes, or all of it. It really depends. And then, of course, I have my custom home building clients, which is also really fun. Those clients typically are more of professionals that have a family and they're looking to move into their forever home or their long-term home. That's a really beautiful process as well, just getting to see how to support and work with multiple energies. Usually it's two parents, 2 to 3 kids kind of thing. So being able to tailor it to everybody and really allowing the space to reflect everyone is such a treat in that sense. And then there are clients that just hire me for the decor. And again, it could be me shopping with them for a few hours, all the way to having their HGTV moment where I source everything, run it past them, make sure they like the vibe, and then I do the install, is what it's called. So install all the decor, all the furniture, and then they get to come home to it. So quite a wide range. And sometimes within that decor aspect, it can be a custom sofa from Restoration Hardware, or it could be something that we're custom building here in the city and they're doing a sit test on it every few weeks to make sure that they really like how it's supporting their bodies and things along those lines, and they get to feel the fabric before it's put on the sofa. So it can be very, very basic all the way to deeply intricate.
That's a nice variety. It sounds like a lot of fun. I can hear that you enjoy all the different aspects.
Mm.
So, can you tell me, how is the process for you different than, say, you mentioned working for other firms where it was more of the designer style? How does your process look different?
So I would say it's more so just the fact that I'm connecting with the client and we're building to some extent. Well, it is a co-creation where I come up with ideas, which is not unlike other design firms, and present it to the client. But these ideas are not necessarily what we're seeing trending on Pinterest or House or Instagram or other places where people consume home ideas. And then the client was kind of thought about last. So it's almost in reverse now. These are more unique ideas that are going to really speak to the client.
So the typical progression that we see today is people will find a design that they like, they'll start with that and then work backwards, and then their own needs and their own actual expression of themselves comes last, and that probably ends up with them having something that isn't a good reflection of their taste, and that goes out of style pretty soon probably if it's based on
Yes,
the trends.
you're totally right. People will always go for what's really trendy instead of like what really connects to them. And then so typically they will hire designers that are, and what I'm saying is that these designers are the ones I've worked for, they are amazing at executing their work. Like they're phenomenal at it, but they have a very specific style and that's what draws the clients. So in a sense it makes it easy for clients because they're like, oh, I like that style, I'm going to move towards it. So to some extent it does ping on their heart center, they do feel connected to it, but they're not aware that they can be a little more in it, if that makes sense, if the client can be a bit more a part of how the space comes through.
Yeah, so they don't have to just pick from a list of options. They can actually be part of the creation, the co-creation, like you said.
Hmm.
So I can guess at the answer here, but do your customers often keep whatever you set up for them for the long term? Like they don't end up changing their designs to keep up with the trends.
Yeah, I've had clients that like I'm still friends with them. I still go over for dinner and I still see their space and they've tweaked a few little things or maybe swapped out some art for others, but for the most part, it's all the same and they love it because the feedback is like people walk into my house and they totally get me. They instantly get me. And it's like, oh, that's such a good feeling. Like we live in a world where we feel so separated all the time. And so for people to come into our homes, whether they know us or don't know us, it is amazing to feel seen. Like that's such a good feeling.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine people wouldn't want to change their house if that's how they felt, and that's what people felt when they come into their space.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And that being said, when they are in a different life transition, I typically do get a call back and they're like, okay, let's now zhuzh it for like the next phase of life.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's when they call you back. So can you describe, is there a particular type of customer who trends towards choosing you for their work, or is it pretty broad?
Yeah, it's pretty broad. So for a while, I was getting a lot of doctors and engineers. That seemed to be the shtick. But now it seems like it's anybody. I think it's anyone who connects to or understands that there's a level of a spiritual connection here. And so I think it doesn't really matter necessarily what you do for work. It's more so like whether or not you believe that there's an opportunity for us to connect authentically and then create space together from there. And most of my clientele, they're all word of mouth. So I think it's one of those things where people tell people that this is kind of the process and they're like, that sounds cool, I'm into it, and then it just kind of unfolds from there.
Yeah, so you get a wide variety of people, but it sounds like they're all pretty open, and then that's why your process resonates with them. That's really cool.
Mhm.
Awesome. Now, a more general question. As an expert, as an interior designer, what are some things that you wish your customers were more informed about?
Ooh, budget and timeline, but I think anybody in
Uh-huh.
this industry is gonna say that.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. I
Oh,
have heard that before.
yeah, that's tricky, right? Like, whether it's the design industry, whether it's the construction industry, it's like, it's always budget and timeline, and knowing that You have to be a little agile in that space. If we give you a number, it's going to be as close as we can possibly make it at that time, but know that different decisions that are being made, know that different selections that are being made, that all changes that price. And as well, it's a bit of a domino effect. It could change the timeline. These are things that are always going to be communicated to the client. I must say, though, that seems to be an older conversation. I don't have those conversations too much anymore. It seems like clients, they hear me, they understand, and they're good with the process. But if there was ever a pain point that kind of still shows up at times, it's that one. Or clients that are getting quotes from you, and they, like, you give them the breakdown, and I think there's still a bit of a disconnect on kind of where their money is going to go, and they're not on the same page with their partner. Like, that kind of disconnect, it's like, okay, if one of the partners is not there at the time, so then we have the conversation with the single partner, and then that information's not translated over. So that kind of disconnect about where money is going to be allocated, how it's going to work, that's kind of frustrating. So it's important for all decision makers to be there, especially when money's discussed, especially at the beginning, and then be a part of the conversation when anything changes.
I like that. That's good advice. So all the decision makers, to say it's two partners, they should be there, because otherwise, if one of them is in the meeting and tries to communicate it and doesn't have the same knowledge that you might have, then they're not going to be able to communicate it as effectively to get it so that everybody is on the same page. Would you say, is HGTV responsible for some of that misunderstanding about budget and timelines?
Oh, Nick, I think you know the answer.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. They pull off magic. TV is magic. There was a point where I did work for HGTV for one of the shows for a little bit, just like 2 episodes, and I got to see the guts of how this comes together. And they have so many people at their disposal. They also have vendors that are willing to ship things on a plane quickly overnight, and there's not even like a glitch in the timeline. So there are things that they can pull off that the average bear, the average contractor, the average designer can't do. So yes, I think HGTV, they've put a little pickle in things, that's for sure.
So it's that TV magic. And that's something I try to communicate, that those shows are entertainment, not educational or reality. That's
Not real
entertainment.
life.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort of how to reset people's expectations, if that's what they're basing their expectations on.
Hmm.
So next, can you share, how do you deal with unexpected challenges on a project?
I would say easily now. I used to really freak out and fret about it because I was like, this is the end of the world. They're going to fire me. And then I realized that I didn't create the issue.
Uh-huh.
I just need to be really great at communicating it. I need to give them all of the information. They need to know exactly what we're up against. And it is an us situation versus them versus me. You know what I mean? It's like us against the problem kind of thing. So I think it really comes down to how you communicate it, be open, clear, and authentic about it, and make sure they have all the information. Then let them know, like, the decision is ultimately in their hands.
I really like that. I think that's a soundbite right there. Challenges become easy if you are great at communication, and it's not them versus us. You tackle it as a team. I think that's valuable for both contractors, other people in your industry, and customers to hear. That's really good. Okay, next one. So in your process, when you're starting out, what's the most essential things that you communicate right at the beginning with your customers, sort of to set yourself up and to set them up for success? What does the initial conversation look like?
It always starts with budget and timeline and the conversation of scope creep, because I don't think a lot of people really understand that. So, especially if you're renovating, right? So, it can be a bit of a domino effect. So, it's like, okay, you know what? I just want to rip up my floors. I don't want to do anything else. And we'll just leave it as it is. Okay, fine. But let me tell you what that actually looks like. So we're going to rip up your floors. And in order to do that, we're going to have to probably pull up your baseboards. And because we pulled up your baseboards, they're probably going to need to be repainted. And your walls now will likely also need to be repainted. So while we're at it, maybe let's look at some wallpaper. Oh, you love the wallpaper and now you want a new sofa? Okay, well, that's totally possible. So all these things kind of flow into each other, but people only see, the floors need to be done. but it's never just the floors, right? And then in some areas, let's say there's water damage near the kitchen and you had no idea. Okay, now we need to pivot. Are we still adding hardwood in the kitchen, knowing that after we fix this, this could be an issue again? Or do we now look at tile? Now, where are we going to create that transition point between your kitchen and your living room or dining room? So it's kind of having that bigger picture conversation. Like, there's a possibility of scope creep here, and this is what it could look like. So really, as the person coming into their home, really being informed, understanding how that process works, and trying to mitigate any surprises.
That's definitely an important one, is the scope creep, because it's almost guaranteed that's going to happen at some point.
Hmm.
That's definitely good to communicate. Awesome. So that's your initial conversation. Looks like budget timelines and make sure they know about scope creep, especially in the renovation circumstance.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about a recent project you've completed, or sort of your favorite project, something you really enjoyed working on?
Yeah, so I just wrapped up this project not long ago. Pictures have not even been taken yet, so this is very fresh. I had the opportunity of working with this really wonderful couple in Eau Claire, and they bought this apartment, and the wife, her and I connected, and she was just like, okay, kind of give me your wildest ideas of how you feel this could work. I presented to her this beautiful maroon purple cabinetry color with this kind of lighter pink for the coffee bar. And I saw these colors in their home. So initially they were moving out of their home that they raised their kids in, and then they were downsizing. So she had me over. I was seeing these beautiful vases she had, these incredible tapestries. And I saw that there was a lot of these kind of plums and eggplant tones and beautiful blush pinks. And I was like, okay, so she's very drawn to this color. Then I created a palette where there's wallpaper involved, there was cabinetry color, there was everything. The whole space was being gutted and renovated. And I brought it to her and she just fell in love. She's like, this is exactly what I wanted. But she's like, I would have never thought to put these colors together. And through the whole process, that was always what she said. She was always so grateful that I gave her the opportunity to push her boundaries without even really realizing it until it all came together. So the process, it wasn't difficult with the client. She was so open to receiving kind of any feedback. Wherever I was like, okay, we could elevate this just a bit more. What do you think about this idea? She always loved it. It was great. Her husband was so happy to oblige. He was like, yes, this feels like us. This feels good. At the end of it, they both thanked me for allowing them to have a space that feels truly like them, where they feel so excited to host, have their grandkids over, and it's not just a beige on cream on white space. Like, it ties in all the elements that they really enjoy that's in their existing home, but it also is a space in some areas for a really clean canvas to add their tapestries, to add their layers and textures of things that feel really connected to them and their culture. So that was a beautiful, beautiful project, and I'm so grateful for it because the connection that I also had with the clients, it was so lovely.
That sounds great. It sounds like their apartment is a work of art, so I'll keep an eye out for those photos for sure. So you touched on, they both agreed they were really happy. Can you sort of talk about what do you think is responsible for that level of success where both the partners were that happy with the outcome? Was that connecting with both of them, or were they already connected well with each other? What was the key to that
I
success?
think I do think it's a blend of both. I think the fact that they were really connected and for the most part on the same page, I was able to connect with them quite easily. And they were also both there whenever big decisions needed to be made. So again, it's that communication piece.
What's some advice you would give, say, to couples who are going through a project? Sort of what are some tips so that they can end up on the same page at the end of the project so that they're both happy?
That is so tricky because I think if you ask any decorator or designer, they're always going to say to some extent you become a marriage counselor. Like, bar none, it happens. You can't really avoid it. I would say that if at the beginning of the project they are not on the same page about budget and timeline, they need to get there before the project ideally starts. Those are really big components because A, if it's a renovation and you're deciding not to move out of your home while it's being renovated, there's a level of resentment that will likely take place between you and your partner if one of them has pushed for it more than the other and the other one was not consenting to it whatsoever. Like there's going to be a big disagreement there, and then it's going to sour everything else. And then too, if you also were not aligned when it came to the budget and one wants to spend more than the other and kind of goes behind the other's back to make decisions, again, spoils it. And the thing that often happens is, yes, there's going to be a bit of a disconnect between the two partners, but because the tradespeople and the designer are outside of the home, unfortunately, we're the ones that kind of get blasted because they don't know where to put their frustration, right? And they're like, okay, I don't have to live with this person, so I could probably offload a little bit here, let some pressure out. I don't think it's a total conscious thought, but it seems like that's kind of one little thing will just set them off. And they're like, okay, today's the day you're going to hear all about it. And you're like, oh, all right.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's when you're in the marriage counselor role. Uh-huh.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are some good tips. So starting off on the same page sounds like that's crucial. And then not forcing their opinions on the other partner. So making the decisions in agreement. That way you don't
Yes.
build resentment. And that definitely sounds like advice for any work or any couple. Avoid the resentment. Definitely. Do you have any questions?
My question is, honestly, what is the highlight of your job that you do? What aspect do you love the most about being in carpentry?
I love all aspects, really. I love everything I do. We're specialized in finished carpentry and applied moldings. So that's what I love is the details that everyone gets to see, not just the framing, everything in behind that makes it happen and makes it functional. I do love the finished aspect, but really my favorite part is when you walk somebody into the finished space and they say, "Wow, I love it. We're so happy." That's really the best possible outcome. So that's what I love about the job.
Yeah, that's such a rewarding aspect of it for sure. When someone comes in, they're like, "Holy smokes, this is amazing! Better than I
Exactly.
expected."
Exactly. That's what I aim for. So what are you looking forward to? What's coming up or on your plate?
As I was mentioning before, there's a lot of decor happening right now, which I love. I am such a tactile person. Being able to create custom drapery, custom bedding. Even right now, I'm creating a custom sofa. So, again, with a local fabricator here. So, my clients get to test it out firsthand as it's being fabricated. We're also doing some custom side tables and some little slipper chairs and like just different pieces. So, most excited about seeing it all come together, and there's such richness in textures and textiles. So I would say maybe even a fiend for it. Like I love fabric. And so
Uh-huh.
to be able to create spaces with it and people get to use the pieces, it just makes me really, really excited.
That's really cool. I didn't know custom bedding was a thing. I didn't know that existed. So learn something new. That's cool.
I mean, it was such a huge thing back in like probably the 90s and earlier. Now you can just almost get anything you want, but this client had very specific requests. They wanted everything to be organic, no off-gassing, had to be a certain color to match with everything else. We wanted it to be tailored a certain way. So it's like, okay, there's some times where you still need custom bedding. So
That's really cool. And on the theme of future, can you talk broadly about your industry, what direction you see it going, what other companies' directions are?
ooh, I don't know. It could really go in so many different directions. I think a lot of people are wanting to create more spaces that reflect them versus what's popular and common right now. Because the more people I talk to, designers included, they're like, wow, yeah, that's such a cool idea. That seems way more sustainable. And I think that's a part of our culture right now is we are looking for sustainability. I think people are just wanting more of a connected experience. So I think that that's going to really come through in our industry more, especially as AI starts to take over a lot of our jobs in a sense, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen some of the design platforms, but it's phenomenal, like incredible. So, going forward, I think people are going to be actually looking more for that human connection and less of just like an output of design. And I think that that's ultimately the human connection is what is going to usher our industry forward.
And specifically, that's you because you're the human element. You're not just putting out designs of modern designs.
Mhm.
So would you say, and it's hard to gauge in general, so are more people gravitating now towards the latest trends, or do you see them moving towards, no, let's make spaces a reflection of ourselves?
I think it's a blend of both right now. I think there are people that are understanding that and moving more towards wanting spaces that reflect who they are. And businesses included. I also do commercial design, and people are really tapping into that aspect too. Is like, this is our clientele, and we want them to have more of an experience versus just coming into a storefront type thing. So I think people are understanding that and gravitating towards it, whether it's conscious or subconscious. I'm not sure yet. I think it'll become more conscious. But then there's, of course, people that they love that show home look. They love the not lived in look. So there's going to be those people that want to have a very, it's not sterile, but yeah, not lived in. You go into a show home and you're like, wow, this is immaculate. It's beautiful, but you can tell it's not tailored to anyone specific. It's just really well designed, really well decorated. And some people want to live in that. And I think that's mostly because those people probably haven't really sat and reflected with themselves. And maybe they haven't had time. Maybe they're like, okay, our kids are just old enough, they're out of the house, and we just want this place to look good for the first time after like 16 years of toys and hockey crap and all that stuff everywhere. We want it to look good. So they're like, okay, Pinterest is going to give us some good ideas. House is going to give us some good ideas. They're like, let's just make this feel better than it ever felt. And so I don't think they've given themselves the opportunity to truly sit with themselves, anchor into what feels good. Instead, they're just like, okay, this is trendy and I'm happy with this. But I think eventually those people will start to look around, especially when the home starts to feel kind of aged or dated. And they'll be like, okay, that actually doesn't really feel that good. I don't know why I ever bought that picture. I never really liked it. So I think those people will eventually get there, but there's definitely a group of people that are just like, okay, we're out of the kid phase. Let's just zhuzh this so it looks good enough. Like
Wow,
adults live here.
that's really interesting. So I'm imagining it's like a blank slate almost when you come into a show home and they want to keep it as a blank slate. They don't apply any of their personal touch. And you're saying that that might even be if they're not in touch with their own deeper personality, then they'll say, okay, let's just keep this a blank slate. And then later, if they do that work and find out more about themselves, then their space eventually will come to reflect that. Is that sort of accurate?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think ultimately it just comes down to there's a lot of busyness that happens when life is happening, when you're raising kids and that kind of stuff. And I don't think that parents really have the luxury of necessarily sitting with themselves. So I think if they're doing it by themselves, they're more often just creating what's trendy. I don't think it's until like they hire someone that necessarily puts the bug in their ear where they're like, oh, it can be a little more tailored to me, that they're then opened up to that perspective. But I think ultimately it does stem from a place of just let's try and make this home a home because it's felt like a playground for so long. So I
Mhm.
think depending on whether they're hiring someone, whether they're not, I hope that wasn't a convoluted answer, but I definitely think it depends on phase of life too, and whether or not the person's really sat with themselves and kind of connected to what they like.
Mhm. Can you talk about that a little more? So, if someone was to sit with themselves and find out what they like, what are some practices? What can people do to make that happen?
So this would be ultimately if you decide not to hire someone. This would be if you want to go on this journey by yourself. So what I would do is I would start a Pinterest board and I would go through the things that I really like that really light me up. Not that's trending. I mean, of course, you're going to have some photos in there of things that are trending because that's just natural. But go through things that feel really good. So let's say you're like, oh, my Lanta, I love a navy wall. But the last time you saw a photo of a navy wall in a room, it's like back from the early 2000s. And you're like, I can't do that because it's old and tacky. It's like, no, tune into that aspect of navy. What do you really like about it? What is speaking to you? And maybe it's not a navy wall. Maybe you paint your door. Let's say this is your primary bedroom. Let's say you paint your door or your closet doors navy instead. So you put a bit of a twist on it. From there, maybe there's this really interesting light fixture that has like one little crystal drop from it and it's like a deep blue or deep navy. You can kind of pull pieces together like that. So look for unique things that really light you up, add them to your Pinterest board, and then almost take a bird's eye view of what the board looks like. Rather than looking at each picture very intently, take an overall view, overall snapshot of it, and see if you like how it feels. Because ultimately, this is what it's about. It's about how it feels. So tap in, see how it feels, and then from there, start to extract components from your board that you really, really like and you know you can start searching for. And the internet is a magical place. It literally has everything. So you can find anything. And if you want things that are a little more custom, but you don't want to pay a large amount, Etsy is great for that. There's so many craftsmen, so many makers on there, and you can find some really cool one-of-a-kind pieces and not break the bank.
That's great. That's really good advice for people who, yeah, maybe starting out their first home and just need some tips on making it their own. One more topic. So you mentioned briefly talking about the future. People are moving towards more sustainability awareness. So can you talk about how do you reflect that in your work and sort of what does that mean for the interior design industry?
Yeah, that's been tricky for me because at the beginning, I wanted to just do green design. I only want to do things that impacted the environment in a positive way and eliminate my carbon footprint, but also the footprint of the projects I'm doing. And that is very difficult. I'm going to be very honest with you. It is not, this industry is not set up that way. And that was frustrating. Uh, and it is still frustrating, but there's ways that I've kind of learned to work around it. So, for example, let's say we're doing a renovation in the kitchen and the granite or marble is in great shape. And I could create the space to look and feel really beautiful around this marble. And this is keeping in mind that the template would remain the same. But instead of having it polished, let's say I get the guys to come in and they leather it instead, or they clean up the edge or something like that to kind of bring it into the century a little bit more. And we're able to enjoy and appreciate an aspect of it that maybe we didn't see before because it was high polish and now it's more of a leather look, so it's more textural. And so we're bringing in a different element without actually changing a component. So there's things like that that you can do, or hardwood floors. People want to rip it out and put laminate or vinyl, and I'm like, no. If there's not an issue with it, keep as much of the natural component in this house as possible. Because again, another big belief of mine is that the more natural elements we have in our space, the higher the vibration is, the higher the frequency is in our space. The more fake stuff we put in it, the more it's going to off gas with chemicals and the lower frequency it has. It's a dead product. It doesn't exist in the realm of a living thing. So things like real granite, real marble, hardwood floors, plaster made out of clay, things like that. It's like you are creating a living, breathing environment, and those things should be appreciated. So if you have hardwood floors in your house, do not rip them out for anything fake. Redo them. And sometimes, yes, it costs the same amount as ripping them out and redoing them, but I promise you, energetically, it's going to feel a lot better. It also ages so much nicer too. So I try and look at it like the sustainability from that perspective instead. Like, what do you have in your home that we can re-love? What are aspects of your personality that would really appreciate newer things? And if they are newer, let's source them more sustainably. Just like fast fashion we're hearing about, there's also fast decor. So realistically, where can we put our dollar? Because every time we purchase something, we're voting, right? We're voting for the direction in which our universe is going. So if we're voting for things that are sustainable, then that's going to allow people that are creating products to make more of them, and it becomes more open to the general public. So if we have the opportunity to spend money in areas where it creates a more sustainable environment, why not?
That's really great. I really like that. Every dollar votes which direction the universe is going. It sounds like the Bhagavad Gita. Every decision you make determines the direction of the universe of your life. But applied to dollars, that makes a lot of sense. And definitely, I agree with the natural components. My favorite room I've done was oak paneled, was hardwood floors, all the walls, coffered ceiling, and quarter sawn oak. And you don't even have to have your eyes open. You can just stand in there and you feel relaxed because I agree. It's the energetic signature of the natural materials. So if people would let me, I would make all of their rooms out of wood.
Cue the 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that.
Anything else you want to talk about?
I do have another aspect to my company that is newer and I'm just kind of getting it going right now. So it's more of an e-commerce side of the business. And I am sourcing around the world for goods and pieces that have high vibration. So connecting with artisans that have understood this craft and it's been passed down through many, many generations to shamans and different healers that are creating beautiful pieces of art that essentially the idea is that I bring these pieces back, put them into clients' homes, and that energy of healing, that energy of peace and calm reverberates into their space and essentially creates that domino effect or that ripple effect into our communities. So this is a newer passion project of mine. Like I said, it's at the beginning phases, the infancy of it. But ultimately, yeah, I'm connecting with these different artisans and healers and bringing back these really unique pieces. Right now, I have some beautiful stuff from Mexico. They're tapestries and area rugs and some bed linens. And they just have this incredible essence about them. Everything is created right with the families. So they raise the sheep, they shear them, and they hand crush all natural components like flowers and ash and rocks and herbs and different things to create different dyes and colors. Then they dye the wool in them, and then they start to weave these really incredible stories into their tapestries. So yeah, that's the passion project right now. That's kind of where Plating Home is also heading, to kind of have this supportive component as well. So support the clients, support these more smaller communities, and we'll see where this takes us.
That's exciting. That's really great.
Thank you. And of course, keeping sustainability in mind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that you're supporting the small artisans. So that's really nice too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Do you want to let the listeners know where your contact information, where they can find you?
Absolutely. So my website is palladianhome.com, spelled PLEIADIANHOME.com. And you can find me on Instagram as well, Pinterest, and LinkedIn, but I don't really check Pinterest or LinkedIn. So my website or Instagram.
That's great. Well, thanks, Karissa, for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Nick. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Constructive Conversations. Please share it with your friends who are contractors and customers, people who have done big renos or builds or who have them coming up, so they can learn how to have the right conversations around their construction project. I encourage you to follow the podcast because we have some very great guests coming up. Thank you again for listening. Have a wonderful day.